Hey, John with padprinters.com. This is the last video in the series about making cliches. This is the final video where we're going to talk about how to determine if your cliche is good or not without putting it in the machine. So there's a couple little tests you can do once you've exposed your cliche and developed it. That's all explained in the previous videos. Once you get to this point, your cliche should be dry. You should have your image visible in here. Again, this is only microns in depth, but one test that you can do is to take your fingernail and go across the image area, and you should be able to hear that little zipping sound. What that is your fingernail going over the surface of the line screen that was exposed in the second exposure. If you can't hear that, it's an indication that your cliche is too shallow. So if you're not hearing this when your cliche is exposed and post-exposed and all dry and you check this, if you can't hear this, it's an indication that your cliche is too shallow. Normally, that's because your film that you printed, if you're printing film on laser printer, wasn't dark enough. So that's an issue that we'll have to address. But that is a sign that this cliche sounds good. If you can catch your finger on the edge of the etch, that would indicate that your cliche is too deep, which means you have a different problem. So this cliche is correct. I can hear this zipping sound, and I can't catch my finger on the edge of the image etch, so this is a good cliche. The other thing that's nice to have is, this is called a linen tester. This is a little 10 power, and with that, you can get in there and really see the image. Can't see it here because of the glare, but this is useful in that if you get a cliche, you'll notice that this one, the whole surface of the cliche is pretty shiny, except for the image area. This one's already been printed with, but if you get a cliche and the entire surface looks kind of dull, then what you want to do is take this 10 power magnifying loupe, and on an angle, you'd look across the surface of the cliche proximate to the image area, and if you can see a dot pattern that looks like the dot pattern that you will see under magnification inside the image here. If you can see that very faintly over the entire surface of the cliche, that is a clear indication that your first exposure was not long enough, and that your bulbs perhaps have lost power, you didn't warm up your exposure unit. But what's happening, if you can see, if your cliche comes out after post-exposure and it's dull, what that indicates normally is that your first exposure was not long enough, so you may have exposed the cliche material partially, but not all the way to the surface, so it wasn't hard in the non-image area yet. When you did the second exposure with your line screen film, it exposed into the surface of the cliche where you didn't want it to, and that's going to cause a problem. Once you put put this in the machine and go to doctor it, you'd have a haze because you have a very faint image dot pattern in the whole surface of the plate that you don't want to have there. You want it to be nice and smooth and shiny like this one. Sometimes you can print with a cliche like that, as long as that dot pattern is not deep enough to hold ink, so that you know, you're not picking it up and transferring it. But most of the time, if you have a cliche that's not shiny and you look at it and you see with magnification the dot pattern over the whole surface of the plate, you want to go in and make another plate and extend your first exposure time to make sure you harden it completely. So, short of putting it in the printer and testing it, those are a couple things you can do to test the quality of the cliche and see if you have a good one. Thanks.